Hello, welcome to Chapter 13, Physical and Cognitive Development in Early Adulthood. These are the objectives we'll be covering. Basically, we're going to look at physical functioning, health and wellness, cognitive changes, and post-secondary education. First of all, there's two different types of aging. There's primary aging, which is a gradual and inevitable process of bodily deterioration throughout life. Secondary aging is preventable processes from disease and poor health practices. So one is just because of time or age, and the other one has to do with things you can do because of your lifestyle. Key thing to keep in mind here is that social class differences appear to be the primary aging cause, but developmental psychologists consider them to be secondary aging because it is preventable if you had a better lifestyle. There's what's called senescence primary aging, which is basic underlying inevitable aging process, where you start getting gray hair, changes in your vision, which is why I deal with my glasses right now. Secondary aging is because of how you live, your habits, environment, which is neither inevitable or experienced by all adults. They may interact with social class, and that affects the aging process. So in other words, the poorer you are, the faster you'll age, or the type of environment can affect how fast you age. Table 13.1 in page 323 of your text talks about how just small lifestyle changes can have some really nice benefits. For instance, if you're overweight, losing 10% of your body weight can really have nice positive health benefits. Adding 10 to 20 grams to your diet of fiber can improve a lot with your bodily functions. Engaging in physical activity every day for at least 30 minutes a day has significant helping with your feelings, overall attitude, bone density. Risk of diabetes is reduced. Heart disease, high blood pressure, it's all reduced just by exercising 30 minutes a day. Stopping smoking any day, which has immediate improved circulation, reduced blood level carbon monoxide, long-term reduced risk of lung cancer. And then if you do recommended 5-year screenings, can reduce chance of a lot of issues. Health differences, income-related variations in social environments make a difference. Many of the same factors contribute to economic differences in health habits. Links between social class and secondary age is pretty complex. Let's talk about the nervous system. Some parts of the brain produce new neurons. There's growth spurts in the brain. There's response inhibition over time. The cortex control of the limbic system slows down over time. Enriched environments seem to help. So in other words, the frontal lobe grows from the ages of 17 to 22. Response inhibition from mid to late 20s. The impulse control response inhibition helps us to weigh choices more carefully by slowing down and regulating the limbic system, which is the emotional part of your brain. And gray matter, gender differences in the brain. Men tend to have a higher proportion of white matter than women do. With white matter, men have a lower proportion of white matter in their left brain than in the right brain. Proportions of gray matter and white matter in the two hemispheres are equal in women's brains. So there's some subtle differences found. Some findings have led to some neuropsychologists to speculate that men's overall superior spatial perception is associated with sex differences in the distribution of gray and white matter. However, looking at this critically, in what ways might the experiences of men and women contribute to gender differences in the brain? But how might this research on gender differences be distorted and misused to justify discrimination against women? Saying, hey, men are better at spatial ability because see, there's gray and white matter and differences. I think the jury's still out on what are some of these differences are still pretty subtle. Okay, as you get older, there's a gradual loss of speed. Once you turn about 35, it reduces by 1% a year. There's also loss of dendrites, slowing of the firing rate of nerves. General physical skills, better physical skills on all measures when compared to older adults. So how can you hypothesize what some of these measures might be? You'll have better physical skills on all measures in terms of being stronger, faster, better immune system, better eyesight, quicker adaptation. In early adulthood, page 325, table 13.2, represents a summary of changes in physical function as a result of primary aging. However, losses may not be that discernible for several years. Heart and lungs. First of all, there's a systematic decline with the age of maximum oxygen uptake. Heart and lungs, maximum uptake reflects the ability of the body to take in and transport oxygen to the body's organs. Usually, as I mentioned earlier, is a 1% per year decline when exercising, beginning between ages 35 and 40. The declines in heart function may reflect the cumulative effects of a sedentary lifestyle, so it pays to keep exercising. Strength and speed. There's a longitudinal study of men showed a loss of grip strength over a 9-year period. Strengths peak in the 20s and early 30s. However, young adults are also more active, affecting strength and speed, which probably explains why a lot of our professional athletes start declining as they approach their 30s, where with golfers, they actually get better because of their grip. Reproductive capacity. Women's reproductive capacity begins to drop in their mid-20s. Their men's capacity diminishes, but it still remains intact older in life. Fertility problems are seen as part of the normal aging process. Because men have the capacity to be fertile throughout life, fertility problems in men are associated with disease or abnormal developmental processes. Let's talk about the immune system. The thymus gland and bone marrow produces B cells and T cells. B cells produce antibodies to fight off external threats. T cells defend against internal threats such as transplanted organs, cancer cells, and viruses. As you get older, there's a decline in number and efficiency of these cells with age. Next, as women get older, it's harder for them to become pregnant. There's something called ART, or assisted reproductive technology. And what it does is it helps couples conceive through what's called in vitro fertilization. They use what's called non-donor fresh eggs. They have the highest success rate. They'll also give drugs to stimulate ovaries to produce eggs. Eggs are retrieved, extracted, and exposed to sperm in a test tube. You ever heard of test tube babies? This is where it comes from. Then they later transfer the embryos. They inject the embryos into the uterus or fallopian tubes. There's a lot of age affects the success rate. But oftentimes there's a multiple birth rate. Even when a single embryo is transferred, a lot of times the embryo splits and creates identical twins. So you decide which you think are the pluses and minuses of ART. The benefits of ART outweigh the risks. If I were faced with fertility problems, I would look into ART, even if it means multiple births. The risks of ART outweigh its benefits. If I were faced with fertility problems, I'd prefer to adopt a child rather than seek help. And there are a lot of children who are seeking adoption. So there you go. The thymus gland is a glandular organ at the base of the neck that produces lymphocytes and aids in producing immunity. It atrophies with age, central to the aging process. It's largest in adolescence, then shrinks. Lower functioning leads to less effective T cells, declines in the immune system, maybe primary aging, or maybe secondary aging, but it's in response to stress or depression. True or false? One of the key physical changes over the years of adulthood is increasing susceptibility of disease. Correct answer is true, unfortunately. As you get older, you're more susceptible to disease. However, there's 7 healthy habits initially identified by longitudinal research in 1965 to 83. The Alameda County study was a major longitudinal study of health habits. This data was collected in 1965, 1974, and 1983. And he found out these things: getting regular sleep, physical exercise, not smoking, not drinking, not over or under eating, can have significant effects in your health. Only 5 habits on the previous slide are independently related to the risk of death. Which of the 2 habits were unrelated? It was basically snacking and eating breakfast. So unhealthy habits, Alameda County study, they found out that poor health habits lead to higher risk of mortality, disease, and disability. If you take a look at what's called BMI, or body mass index, if it's too high, it can lead to especially a lot of problems. Lack of physical exercise is linked to a higher risk in death. Additional research links show that the higher their BMI, your weight to height ratio, numbers in women were associated with lower risks of death. For those of you who smoke, 69% of current smokers want to quit, and half of those who want to quit have actually tried to do so. Now remember, nicotine is a highly addictive drug, both physically and psychologically. The withdrawal symptoms subside when a brain adjusts to the lack of nicotine, and this takes about 2 weeks. Nicotine replacement produces increase in likelihood of relapse, so the jury's still out on these nicotine patches and everything. They found that psychotherapy and exercise increase the success rates more than the nicotine replacement therapy. Planning to quit during times of stress also contributes to likelihood of success during reduced stress. So the less stressed you are, the less likely you're going to relapse. In your book, they talk about Leanna, who was unsuccessful in her attempts to quit smoking. What advice would you give to her to improve her chances? Probably exercise more, have a support system, people to talk to when she's stressed out. Alternative behavior that would help her to quit. Positive effects. There's with social support, there's adequate amounts of social support. They lower the risk of disease, death, and depression. Effects found across diverse age groups. It may boost your immune system functioning. So they use data from a social network index link between social connections and physical hardiness. So have a good network of support, you will be healthier. Then there's what's called perceived control. The term self-efficacy is a belief in one's ability to perform some action or control one's behavior environment to reach some goal. If you have what's called an internal locus of control, that's where your attributes are the cause of many consequences rather than external factors. In other words, if I have a good internal locus of control, I feel like I have control over my world or my reality. And self-efficacy means I believe I can manipulate and change my world rather than external factors. So optimism may also boost the immune system. where pessimism appears especially problematic over the age of 45. So the ability to be realistic is important to health, and positive about your outlook is very important to your health. Let's talk about sexually transmitted diseases. Bacterial STDs are caused by microorganisms that can be eradicated with antibiotics. Chlamydia is number one, gonorrhea, and then syphilis is distributed equally among men and women, but women are more susceptible to long-term damage from infection. There's a significant decline in the prevalence, but has been increased dramatically since 2002, and it's largely confined to men. Chlamydia is transmitted through intimate genital contact. Women are 3 times as likely as men to suffer from it, but can remain symptom-free. Unfortunately, undiagnosed chlamydia can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease and infertility. Gonorrhea has declined over the years, but new strains of that are more resistant to antibiotics have come along. Causes are long-term damage to reproductive systems. Syphilis can lead to serious mental disorders and death. Infection rates are really high among African Americans. Viral STDs caused by viruses, they're considered incurable. Genital herpes is acquired through intercourse or oral sex. 20 to 30% of adults are affected. There are periodic attacks that come on. Genital warts are caused by the human papilloma virus. Visible symptoms are warts. There's a new vaccine that may be effective. Let's talk about HIV or AIDS. There's over 1 million cases in the US today, over 20 million cases in sub-Saharan Africa. It's transmitted through exchange of body fluids. It's still pretty high among male homosexual rates. However, it also affects heterosexuals as well. So answer these questions as true or false. AIDS is a single disease. False. AIDS is not a single disease. Rather, it's a severely impaired immune system, which leaves a person with AIDS highly susceptible to a whole host of infections and diseases. So it attacks your immune system, and you'll probably die of some other disease because your immune system is down. AIDS symptoms vary widely from country to country and even from risk group to risk group. Correct answer is true. In the United States and Europe, AIDS sufferers may develop Kaposi sarcoma, a rare form of skin cancer, pneumonia, and tuberculosis. In Africa, people with AIDS usually waste away with fever, diarrhea, and symptoms caused by tuberculosis. 3. Those at the greatest risk for AIDS are people who have sex without using condoms, drug users who share needles, and infants born to AIDS-infected mothers. Correct answer for number 3 is true. These groups are the greatest risk. Screening of blood donors and testing of donated blood have greatly reduced the risk of contracting AIDS through blood transfusions. However, today women make up the fastest growing group of infected people, and AIDS spreads among heterosexuals, especially in Africa. Number 4, AIDS is one of the most highly contagious diseases. False. AIDS is not among the most highly infectious disease. You cannot get AIDS from kissing, shaking hands, or using objects handled by people who have AIDS. One way to avoid contracting AIDS is use an oil-based lubricant with a condom. False. Do not use oil-based lubricants, which can eat through condoms and cause your condom to fail. Latex condoms with an effective spermicide are safer. Learn the sexual history of any potential partner, including HIV test results. Do not have sex with prostitutes or people who had multiple partners. That increases your chance. Let's see, STDs are more common among 15 to 25-year-olds and among any other group. Risky sexual behaviors include having multiple partners and lack of protection. 2 big no-nos. We talk about intimate partner abuse. This is different than domestic violence. Domestic violence is just limited to household violence or violence among people in the household. Where intimate partner abuse involves physical acts or other behaviors intended to intimidate or harm another intimate partner. Intimates are couples who date or cohabitate or engage, married, or former partners. Whereas men and women are equally likely to push, slap, or kick a partner, women are more likely to be injured or hospitalized as a result. The prevalence, 6 in 1,000 women and 1 out of 1,000 men injured by what's called intimate partner abuse. Hispanic women have higher rates of abuse. The critical factor may be poverty, because there's a lot of stress among couples in poverty, not race. Rates for gay men and lesbian women are probably about 25, but may be underreported because of discrimination or perceived discrimination. Rates of physical abuse among women around the world. This is in page 333 of your book. This data on physical abuse are based on World Health Organization survey of medical records. So if you notice, Nicaragua, Bangladesh, Ethiopia have pretty high rates, but the United States is still pretty high. But it's not as high as Canada. So it's interesting, Canada has higher abuse than the United States. Characteristics of abusers and victims. First of all, there's cultural attitudes. In cultures where women are regarded as property, there's a higher rate of intimate partner abuse. Gender role prescriptions. It's high in Japanese women based on the belief that men are absolute authorities over wife and children. It leads to a higher level of partner abuse. Personality traits. The same cluster of traits in heterosexual and homosexual abusers exist. There's a tendency towards irrational jealousy, control of relationships, or sudden mood swings, or quick temper. Aggressive men and unemployed men are most frequent abusers. People with history or experiences across the lifespan of abuse are more likely to be abusive. So if they've been abused as children, they're more likely to abuse as an adult. Young women between 16 and 24 are more likely to be abused than older women. This may reflect less ability of young women to act independently of the abuser. They may be more likely to be caring for young infants. They may be undereducated. Then, of course, alcohol and drug problems are common things along with abuse. Effects of abuse: women may develop anxiety, depression, shame, and low self-esteem. Women who abuse or witnessing abuse influences negative development in the children. So they may more likely become a victim or an abusive person themselves. Feelings intensify if the victim believes herself to be trapped in that situation and can't get out. Why do a lot of women not leave an abusive relationship? I call it the F factors. One is fear. Another one is faith. Their religion might tell them that they need to stay in that relationship. Another one is they see him as a father and want him to play an active role in a relationship. The other one is FIDO. A lot of times a abuser may threaten to kill the dog, or fear of for their own life or for the life of their child. So those are some of the F factors. Maybe the financial, not being able to, being trapped and not being able to get out of the situation. So those are some of the F factors. Prevention. There's some new laws out there that help enforce abuse. In Omaha, Nebraska, if you're charged with abuse, even if the wife refuses or the partner refuses to press charges, the county will still press charges anyways. So you don't need to have the victim report it. There's temporary shelters that are available. There's training programs for victims, stressing problem-solving skills, Community-wide and school-based approaches also educate people about intimate partner abuse. So stop and think. Some experts have proposed that date rape might be more traumatic than rapes perpetrated by strangers. Do you know why? Victims often believe they should have been able to prevent the assault if it's someone they knew. Sexual violence, episodes of partner violence in which the individual uses force to coerce another to engage in sexual acts. 3/4 of incidents occur in the context of some type of relationship. So it's not some stranger on the street, it's usually someone they know. Among women, 14 to 25% are affected. That's pretty high. 3% of men are victims. So 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5. Date rape is often premeditated, can cause sexual dysfunctions and post-traumatic stress disorder, which can be treated. Young adulthood, there's a high incidence of mental health problems. A lot of times once the increase in age, these things might come around. The highest expectations and highest levels of role conflict and role strain may occur then. And it could lead to anxiety and depression, these new expectations and roles. Researchers are focusing on the biological causes. Mental illness runs in families. Disturbances in specific brain functions do occur. So they look at what's called the interaction of biology and the environment. And it's important that you consider this both as biological, but it's also environmental. So it's a combination of the two. The top 2 mental health issues are anxiety and depression. Anxiety may include phobias, irrational fears of objects, persons, places, or situations, and it's learned through association. Therapy involves the unlearning of the association, and it may be free-floating. Depression, on the other hand, rates are higher in early adulthood than in adolescence or middle age. It may result from intimacy issues, and loneliness can be a recurring problem. It is treatable through both therapy and medication. Personality disorders. It's an inflexible pattern of behavior that leads to difficulties in social, educational, and occupational functioning. And this could relate to stressful breakups. Surveys suggest as many 50% of college students engage in binge drinking, which is basically they're trying to medicate their own mental health with alcohol, which is not a good way of handling it. These are a list of this chart on page 337. Lists personality disorders: antisocial, paranoid, histrionic, narcissistic, borderline, and their characteristics are listed with each. Schizophrenia is a mental disorder. It makes it difficult to tell the difference between reality and unreal experiences. To think logically, to have normal emotional responses, to behave normally in social situations. So it's characterized by false beliefs or delusions and false sensory experiences called hallucinations. It could be delusions of grandeur, delusions of persecution, auditory hallucinations such as hearing voices. It's often debilitating, but may be helped by powerful antipsychotic medications and therapy. Some quick facts about alcohol and drug abuse, which is also called substance abuse. It peaks between 18 and 40. There are some major gender differences in drinking. Binge drinking, which is having 5 or more drinks in one evening, is common among college students. There's both physical and psychological dependence, and tolerance may occur. Tolerance means you have to start drinking more and more in order to get the same high. Factors influencing addiction: it's how quickly the drugs are felt, how effectively the drug produces that euphoria, how long the pleasurable effect lasts, how much discomfort is experienced when the use is discontinued, which is the withdrawal. Substances most often abused are stimulants like caffeine, nicotine, amphetamines, cocaine, depressants like alcohol, barbiturates, tranquilizers, and narcotics, and hallucinogens like marijuana, LSD, and MDMA. How many of you thought marijuana was a hallucinogen? I always thought it was a depressant. That was interesting. Next is cognitive changes. Post-formal thought is relativistic thinking, and it's characterized by an understanding of the relative, where you start not seeing everything in black and white. You start seeing the gray area in between. There's a non-absolute nature of knowledge. Later thinking reflects thinking skills that are more relative and reflect complex thought. Contextual validity is basically learning how to solve problems associated with social roles and occupations. Dialectical thought is where you attempt to describe fundamental processes of change and in dynamic relationships through which change occurs. Next is reflective judgment. This is a stage model characterized by 7 distinct but developmentally related sets of assumptions about the processes of knowing and acquisition of knowledge. King and Kitchener analyze arguments and underlying assumptions. So theories on post-formal thought are still speculative. There's little current empirical research backing this up. With IQ scores, they tend to remain stable across early adulthood. The Seattle longitudinal study suggests that intelligence test scores rise slightly in adulthood before dropping at around age 60. Sorry, it goes down. Crystallized intelligence is the ability to do daily tasks such as read a newspaper. It depends heavily on education and experience. It remains steady throughout early and middle adulthood. Fluid intelligence is more what we learn on the go. Speed measures of abstract reasoning. There's a steady decline throughout our lifespan in fluid intelligence, which is our ability to learn new things. Figure 13 results from the Seattle longitudinal study, shows both cross-sectional and longitudinal data for a measure of overall intellectual skills. So if you notice that around age 60, you kind of peak out, and then it's just downhill from there. Post-secondary education, which is any formal schooling following high school. The developmental impact is more promotions, less unemployment, professional field openings, vocational aspiration increases as you get more education. There's enhanced internal locus of control, where you feel in control of your world. Social impact is more socialization opportunities, advances in moral and social reasoning, and advanced capacity for empathy. This figure 13.3 on page 344 shows college completion rates. They vary from one racial group to another. These figures represent the percentage of students who complete a degree within 6 years of taking their first degree as a degree-seeking student. Notice Asian Americans have a much higher completion rate, followed by white Americans, then Hispanic Americans, and African Americans, and Native Americans. Usually has more to do with social economic and whether you're in your parents' education level. That usually affects your success rate in college. The experience of attending a post-secondary institution varies for males and females. Women study twice as much as men. Men party twice as much as women. Male behavior may arise from desire to assert masculine identity. There's a disengagement from academic pursuits and heightened interest in risky behavior for males. So women make much better students on average, if you want to follow that stereotype. There's a difference between what's called traditional and non-traditional students. Traditional are your full-time students. They enroll in school full-time directly after graduation, and are now only 1/4 of the enrollees in college. Half obtain a degree within 6 years. Most people try to, finish on the 4-year plan because it's expensive going to college. Traditional students often pursue bachelor's degrees. Non-traditional students often enroll in 2-year colleges. They are less often likely to complete degrees than traditional students. Non-traditional students tend to have less of a social network on campus or support from the institution. That's really critical for successful management of conflicting demands of school, family, and work. Non-traditional students may delay their entry into college. They tend to be independent from parents, so they no longer have that support. They're employed full-time or enrolled part-time. A lot of them have children or possess a GED rather than a high school diploma. Finally, post-secondary education students with disabilities. It's a requirement now for all colleges to serve people with disabilities. Colleges must provide modifications to facilities and special education services. Students with disabilities now make up about 9% of the college population. They receive lower course grades than their peers and frequently perceive college faculty to be inhospitable. However, there's been some changes over time in adaptations made by faculty in colleges. 60% of college students are now female, and we talked about men party more and are influenced by peer pressure and behavior more. But female college students have higher graduation rates, they study more, they have lower entrance exam scores and lower entrance into prestigious programs, but they party less and they're influenced less by peer pressure. Graduation rates vary across different ethnic groups. We talked about this, the rates. And for there's something called, what's that called? Like traditionally Black institutions. And for African American and Hispanic American students, there's a strong sense of ethnic identity. It's associated with persistence and academic performance. So it may help by providing belonging to the college community. Cognitive and social development for African American students appears higher in historically Black colleges than in predominantly white schools. So the key is if you want to be successful in college, feel connected with the college, be part of that college, have a social support system through that college. This ends our unit chapter 13. Have a great day.